Welcome to Myth versus Craft. Welcome to episode 5 of Myth versus Craft, where I set out to interview interesting people who excel at what they do. My guest today is the award-winning blues guitarist and singer, Matt Schofield. He's been named one of the top 10 British blues guitarists of all time by Guitar and Bass magazine. And though he's only 38 years old, he's already been inducted into the British Blues Hall of Fame. Though his music is firmly rooted in traditional blues, he infuses it with jazz, funk, and soul, creating his own distinctive style. His playing is tasteful and his phrasing impeccable. I encourage you to visit mattscofield.com to find his music and find out if he'll be performing near you anytime soon. Here we go. Matt, thank you so much for being on the podcast. It's a pleasure to have you.
Pleasure to be here. Thanks.
Let's go way back to the beginning. You were born in Manchester and started playing guitar at age 12. I read that your dad gave you a video of B.B. King and it set everything in motion.
Pretty much.
You also cite Albert Collins and Stevie Ray Vaughan as early influences. I'm curious, did you find yourself gravitating toward American blues artists for the most part, or did any of the blues greats in the UK also make an impact on you?
For the most part, it was all the American players for whatever reason. I mean, I think that's just mostly what my dad was listening to and what I'd grown up hearing. So he was, or he is, a product of a generation where people started discovering the blues in Europe and before people started playing it over there, really. So he was listening to all the original guys and a lot of acoustic and Delta and Mississippi type stuff as well. But I was drawn to his collection of electric blues players, you know. So, I mean, there was a little bit of Eric Clapton in there for me, which is kind of course, when you start playing guitar and you're a British kid, you check out Eric Clapton. So, but other than that, it was pretty much all American musicians. Yeah.
Your first gig, I believe, was at age 13. What was the local music scene like in Manchester?
Well, actually, by then I'd moved away from Manchester, so we moved down south when I was about 8. So, having been raised in Manchester initially, I grew up in a little tiny countryside town. So in the place called Fairford in Gloucestershire, which is in the Cotswolds part of the UK, which is very picturesque countryside, but absolutely no music scene whatsoever at all. So my school band, was the band in the area. That was what the music scene was like. So no one was really involved in it at all. So we did it ourselves, you know.
Was that challenging for you, or do you think, if anything, it maybe provided more opportunities for you to play out and garner more attention?
Well, we didn't really get much attention initially beyond the small area, but yeah, it was cool because we were a band right away. So it was me and my friends from school, and we all happened to have found this kind of music that we loved. But in hindsight, it probably would have been nicer to have other more experienced musicians to be around and learn from, you know. So we were a bit isolated in that respect. But the cool thing, there was a U.S. Air Force base near where I grew up. It was a Royal Air Force base, but they loaned it to the U.S. Air Force. And so that was our main gig for a while. We used to go and play in the rec room for the fighter pilots, because they were Americans and they knew about blues, which most of the people in our area didn't. So that was kind of cool that we were like the only guys who had that to offer around there. So, but it wasn't until I started going to London when I was about 18 that I started playing and meeting and hearing more experienced, more skilled musicians. And that was really when I began to develop, I suppose, more than just being a young kid who can blow some guitar solos or something, you know?
I hear quite a bit of jazz and funk in your playing.
Oh, yeah.
At what age would you say those styles began to become evident and color your music?
Probably around 15 or 16 years old. It was actually hearing Robben for the first time, a record of his, and he had, well, it still felt the same as all the blues guys I was listening to, but he had all these other notes, and I was like, where's he getting these from? And of course, this is pre-internet and pre-YouTube. You can't just jump online and find out about things. And I didn't really know anybody who knew a great deal about jazz. Sort of back then you had to know somebody who had a record to play you or tell you what to get. So I found out somehow, read a guitar magazine, that Robben was listening to saxophone players, jazz saxophone players, to get a lot of his phrasing and his melodic ideas. So I started slowly dipping into that kind of stuff, and actually for myself found that I really love jazz piano, particularly Oscar Peterson. So he's been a big influence on me in as much as his time feel and his pocket and his swing and his groove, and that kind of thing. So yeah, it was pretty early on, but I didn't really have an opportunity to play anything on the jazzier side. Early on it was still more on your kind of straight ahead blues and blues rock and that kind of thing. So it was a slower sort of process to integrate that or find an outlet for it in the music. And really, until I started playing with my own band, I didn't have a chance for that.
You moved to London at age 18
That's right.
And played as a sideman with a number of artists. Were most of them blues artists?
Yes, very much so. In fact, I tried to do. I got offered a couple of like pop sessions, in the studio to play guitar on some records, and that's good money, better than a blues gig. So I'm still a teenager, and I go to this first session, and the producer wanted me to play just something really, really simple. It was just like a straight up D chord arpeggio or something, and I kept putting a little, bit of vibrato on it or something that I wasn't even aware I was doing. It was just coming out, and he said, "Yeah, can you just not do it like that?" And I couldn't do it. I couldn't play what he asked me to play. I could only play what I felt. And so I said to him, "Look, I don't think I'm the guy for the job here." And that was the last pop session I ever did in my life. And I just decided, I went home and I said, well, guess I'm just going to have to do what I do, and hopefully people will like that. So yeah, so it was always, blues bands and blues related stuff, and some funkier side of things and jazzier side of things, but for the most part, always rooted in blues. Yeah.
I believe you did that for a number of years, perhaps even 7 years.
Yeah.
What lessons did you take from your time as a sideman? I imagine the whole time you were paying attention and learning from the folks with whom you were playing. What are some of the key lessons you took away from that?
So much, yeah. I mean, well, first of all, I was just happy to have a gig, and be able to play guitar and do that and not have to get a real job, as they say. But so that was the first thing, is just being grateful to even get to play music all the time, and always trying to remember that no matter what you're up to. I still think about that now. And of course, lots of musical lessons about not so much. Well, first of all, it was a good experience getting to play in a band without having to worry about fronting it and communicating with the audience, and getting to learn about fitting in the band as part of the rhythm section, which, so many guitarists are just about being up front and getting to the solo, but being in the pocket with the band and learning about how to play grooves with the band and how to lock together and work as a team in the music. That was one of the best experiences. So I really grew out of that, playing with good drummers, basically. So when you start to play with really good drummers, and you have to lock in with them. And, I'm not getting a solo on every tune or something. I'm not necessarily featured. So how can I make the band sound better?
Right.
Was the big thing. And still now, I love just getting in with the band and playing while somebody else blows. Even in my own band, that's why I've never really enjoyed playing straight up power trio with guitar, bass, and drums, because I miss being able to back somebody else up. Playing rhythm guitar is one of my favorite things to do. Just lock in there. Nothing feels better than that. So that musically would be the biggest thing, about just how to make the music sound better and find your spot in it as well when you're playing in a bigger band, and not step on somebody else's toes or get in the way or that kind of thing. But then probably the next biggest lesson is not so much even about the music. It's more, you're on tour with a certain group of people in enclosed spaces for long periods of time, and it's just kind of like a how to do that experience, and you see people that you're like, I don't want to be that guy in the band, I don't want to be that, you know, hassle that guy is causing, so some of it is just about learning to just be cool with whatever the situation is and roll with it and be flexible in life and situations, so I'd say that's about half of what I learned being in other bands as well. It's just about how to be in a band, and then the consequence of that is you also learn how to lead a band and what kind of band leader you want to be based upon how you've been treated by the band leaders you've worked for,
For
um,
sure.
it was half musical, but half just music industry and life.
Can you pinpoint the moment or the age at which you decided that you were going to take a shot at making a career in music?
Yeah, about 5 minutes after I picked up the guitar.
Oh, wow.
No, I mean, really, it was like, it sounds funny, but from that moment, that it's right around the time Stevie Ray Vaughan got killed, actually. And, I'd been getting more and more into it. And then, I was like just turned 13 the week before, I think. And, well, I got to do this, it just, that just all added to the desire to do it, that I just found this great artist and then he was gone, I
Hmm.
mean, this was all in a matter of weeks. So yeah, that was when I went back to school in that September and got the band together with my friends. And I mean, I basically just carried on doing it since then. So it was. I said to everybody, I'm going to be a guitar player, and for some reason they believed me, and they still seem to. I seem to be getting away with it now for 25 years. So yeah, it's funny, but I never had any intention of doing anything else from that moment.
Wow. Did you receive any formal education in music, or did you learn everything in the trenches, so to speak?
No, I mean, actually, when I was about probably 8 or 9 years old, maybe something like that, I learned some Christmas carols on guitar at school. Like just the cowboy chords, like a E and a D and a G or something. So that's by the local guitar teacher. So that's the extent of my formal education. And then, from when I picked it up again, about 12, to play blues on it. I've just figured it out myself. But and from you know hanging around other great musicians and asking them what they're doing and annoying them and paying attention.
How did you pick up your jazz chops in terms of harmony, in terms of voicings, in terms of the just everything there is to learn beyond the blues in the jazz realm?
Listening to jazz, it's it's as simple as that. In fact, a lot of people, they'll come up after, how do you, what's that jazzy stuff you doing? How do I learn that? It's a really common question from guitar players who are probably come from blues or blues rock or classic rock or something, and they, what, what should I do to learn that? And the answer is listen to jazz. So most
Hmm.
people, they want the cool, flash impressive bit of playing some diminished line or something, on the guitar that turns people's ears, but they don't actually listen to jazz to find out where that comes from, So
Right.
you have to invest in the music, and you are a product of what you listen to. So yeah, it's just listening to music. It starts to come out, but I mean, there's a really slow road, and it took me years, coming from blues to even figure out the basic building blocks of harmony and things like that. I kind of worked backwards at it by looking for sounds that I liked and then discovering what exactly it was I was doing. So. But it goes in a different way than if you'd just shown it and like from a theory point of view. So now I know enough theory to explain what I'm doing, but it's always been figure out something that I want to get out, what that I want to express, or a sound that I want to find, and then piece it together with what's actually going on there. So probably the wrong way around, but it's worked okay. So
I just had David Grissom on the show, and he mentioned he had a jazz guitar teacher at age 15, and he learned quite a bit. And then he said that pretty early on, he realized that being a really good jazz guitar player was a full-time occupation.
Oh, completely, yeah.
and that there were too many other styles of music that attracted him and that were interesting to him, and that's why he backed off somewhat on that side of his playing.
I can completely relate to that because I would say it's a path that I've stood and looked down, but didn't want to venture down. It's kind of that's the way it feels for me. At some point, you sort of decide how far down that rabbit hole you want to go, and I've never practiced technique. I've never sat there and like done scales or done some kind of physical technique without there being a need for it in the music that I was trying to create, if that makes sense. So, and at some point, it seemed like, to go all the way down the jazz route, I would actually have to sit there and get into the mechanics of it in some way in order to be able to play it. And that just wasn't what I was kind of after in terms of expressing myself. So I totally relate to that. It is an investment, to go that far down. Or you decide, I just want to sound like me. And that's what I decided to do. Is that was the most important thing. And my biggest heroes, more than anything else, they just had that sound within one or two notes. And I thought, well, that's really what I want to do, more than know everything on the guitar.
Do you still find time to practice? And when you do, I imagine you mentioned you don't practice technique, but it might be phrasing, it might be improvisation. Or do you find that playing live is all the practice you need?
I've never had any kind of like routine or schedule or, I've just, I just pick up the guitar and I just play around on it. It's more like a adventure or something fun. So, I mean, I pick up the guitar all the time and I play around on it and new things come out, and that's very different than being on the gig, So, and as I get older as well, there's an element of just like staying somewhat physically in shape as well between tours. Like I used to be able to, in my 20s, I could just pick up and go cold straight in there, but that doesn't get any easier as I approach 40, and no doubt it will get even harder as time goes on, So there's a physical element of having to nimble, stay in shape. If you call that practicing, I don't know. But to me, it's just, I just play guitar and that's what I've always done. And it's more for the process of making music than just playing guitar for guitar's sake to get better at guitar or something. It's like making music, really.
Right. I find your music very interesting in that many of your songs appear to be pretty orthodox at first, only to reveal more intricate harmonies and fresh chord progressions or twists. You manage to do this without making it seem like you're trying to do it, like trying too hard, which I think is part of the appeal of the music. How do you do this? Does it come naturally, or do you work hard at being inventive?
That's a good question. That's a cool observation. Thank you. There is a little element of just trying to amuse myself, for want of a better, or keep it interesting for me first and foremost, right? So, yeah, most of my songs, if it's either chord progression or groove, you can split them up into two categories. If the groove is a traditional kind of blues groove, then I'm gonna mess with the changes a bit. Or if the changes are a pretty straight thing, I'm going to mess with the groove a bit, if that makes sense. Just because I would just basically be bored playing the same progressions over and over. And rhythmically, I like interesting things. I like playing over odd time signatures or having to make a change at a certain point, melodically, or hit the change perhaps where you wouldn't be expecting it. So yeah, I wouldn't crowbar anything in there. I wouldn't force something if it didn't feel natural. But it is fairly thoughtful in terms of trying to just put a twist in there. But it's to keep it interesting for me and hopefully for everybody else.
Do you have a set process to write songs, or does it happen in many different ways?
Yeah, many different ways. I wish I did have a set process actually, because it's not something I find easy at all, So, in fact, the rest of it, like the guitar playing bit, was always pretty easy, I never thought twice about it, and I sounded okay very quickly. But singing, writing songs, my goodness, that's a whole other thing. So that's actually where I've probably most of the last 10 years put most of my effort. Going back to practicing even, and it's like, well, I kind of like how I play guitar now. I'm not missing. I'm not like, I wish I could do this more, or something. I'm always trying to grow with it, but the main focus is like the context for that guitar playing they go into, and so trying to, write better songs that express more of what I'm about musically. So I wish I had a process, but yeah, it just comes out, and you have to be kind of open to something possibly being the beginning of an idea, like, so I improvise solos every night on stage, and in a way they're mini compositions, and
Right.
so it's trying to catch something that you could take, sort of build upon into more than just a guitar lick or a phrase or something. It's probably where it starts. But man, it's hard. I've thrown away a lot more songs than I've ever recorded.
When did you start singing?
I always sang a bit, and then in the band that we were talking about earlier, in the high school band and stuff. But then when I became a sideman, that really went on the back burner. Like I said, I was just happy to be just playing music, and so playing my guitar, turn up for the gig on time, and that was cool. So so really, then when I started the project, what's that, 2002, 2003, I really started doing more of my own thing than sidemen things, and we did a fair amount of instrumentals to start with, and it was like, yeah, somebody's got to sing now, haven't they? Because all the music I love is generally, or most of the music I love, outside of the jazz stuff, is vocal music. All my really big heroes are great singers as well. So yeah, I'm about 12 or 13 years behind on singing. One day when I grow up, hopefully I'll be able to sing it to equal standards. But you kind of grown up in public in that respect, that like my first studio record was the first time I ever sang in a studio. That was like, oh my God, how do I do this now? So yeah, it's hard. It's hard. That's been the other one with songwriting, that becomes those become the focus more than the guitar takes care of itself.
Most artists seem to talk about the need to constantly evolve, but I get the sense that each artist has his own interpretation of what that actually means. What's your perspective on artistic evolution?
Interesting question. Yeah, you do want to feel like you're growing and you're moving forward without a doubt. And I think people who haven't done that, that's been the downfall. Particularly not to criticize anyone in particular, but there's been a lot of blues artists throughout history where you don't need all their records. Like they kind of do what they do, and that's amazing. But they do another record. They kind of make the same record over and over again. And so that's something that I've always tried to avoid. But at the same time, there's nothing greater than having a sound. So in a way, for me, I suppose, certainly from a guitar playing point of view, in terms of evolving, it's more become like a process of refining than evolving, where the most important thing to me is just having my sound. So there's a Matt Schofield sound, and some of that is getting rid of stuff almost, rather than adding more. It's like narrowing it down. And I suppose that applies to the music as a whole, is, making something really definitive rather than more complex, for example. Just, simplicity is hard to do well. That's like the ultimate achievement, is for something to stand up strongly and be simple, So that's kind of process as I see it, rather than some arbitrary idea of getting better, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think it might have been Da Vinci that said that simplicity was the ultimate form of sophistication, or something to that effect.
That's exactly the quote that I was looking for and couldn't find in my brain. But yeah, that's exactly the one. It is the ultimate form of sophistication. So I guess it depends on how you view evolution, and what route you want to take down it. And I think that goes back to that jazz guitar thing of amassing knowledge, as some people do on an instrument, is one thing. But even, the really great jazz players, that's why you listen to Oscar Peterson play piano, or B. King play guitar. They're beyond the instrument. They are outside. The instrument almost becomes irrelevant, and you're just listening to an artist express themselves. There's that aspect of wanting to and aiming for that in terms of evolving towards something. But then there's also just the more mundane aspect of trying to make a better record each time. And that's something that I do keep in mind rather than churning out the same thing. And that's tough in blues as well, because it's not always hugely welcomed in the blues world. Like it's sort of pushing things it's quite conservative, the blues world, in terms of what they'll accept. So you have to tread a line, and that goes back to what we were talking about with the songwriting. I don't know where that line is, where something isn't blues anymore. But I know there is one, and I feel it, where it's like I've pushed this, but it still feels like blues. Or now it doesn't at all, So I'm not that I'm any blues purist in any way, but there's still something that makes things feel like blues. And that's what I need myself to enjoy it, it needs to feel right. And so it's also kind of trying to evolve within some kind of imaginary boundaries, that keep it feeling like integrity's in it.
For sure. I don't know if it would make much commercial sense, but have you ever gotten the itch to flat out cross that line and go beyond the blues and try something else?
Yeah, absolutely, all the time. In fact, now based over here in South Florida, I go out most evenings, and the guys who are playing in my band now, they have their own couple of projects that they play all week with around town. And it's not blues at all. Although to me it kind of still is, but it's like modern funky, I guess, for want of a better term, that snarky puppy type, modern funky fusion jazz kind of thing. And I sit in with them, and that I love all that kind of stuff, And I love John Scofield, and every single one of his records is different. Every record that John Schofield makes is a different project, and he'll dip his toes in something. But he always sounds like John Schofield on it. He always sounds exactly just like himself. And that's the position I would love to be in, where you were completely free to, you basically get together with a group of musicians that provide a certain sound, like John Schofield does with Medeski, Martin and Wood, or his Uber Jam band, or, then he does his traditional jazz, more of a traditional thing with Bill Stewart. And, it's that, that's kind of the ultimate career, but I think it takes a while. I'm still just trying to get people to, know about me and come to the gig. So you kind of have to at least maybe plant your foot in one place for a while just to get a hold, you know what I mean? And then maybe one day I can start kind of jumping around a little bit more. But that isn't always welcome in blues, maybe more so in jazz. But I need it. I need to play lots of different kind of things, because otherwise it slips away. You lose the ability to be broad. You become narrow, and that's what I was saying about. Unfortunately, a lot of blues artists end up making the same record over and over again because they're not bringing anything else in, and they're not ever going all the way across that boundary. Like you say, you've got to go and stand outside it sometimes.
How often are you away from home on tour?
A lot, yeah. Probably like half the year I'm doing something. I've never actually sat down and figured it out exactly. But and like the last couple of months, for example, we said we're not going to drive around in the van for months. We're going to do like some weekend things, like 2 or 3, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, or Friday, Saturday, Sunday. And so I did that since basically like the beginning of September. We did a little run on the East Coast, and I went to California, and then came back for a couple of days. And then I can't remember, somewhere else. And then I flew to Italy for one show, out Friday, back Monday. Then I went to Texas, and like I was home for like 2 days at a time in between. And that just ended this past weekend. So I think that's more exhausting than just going out on tour. But that's the first time I'd tried it that way. So it was sort of like I was home Tuesdays and Wednesdays for 2 months, and then gone again. So the air miles were good, but yeah, it's funny old existence sometimes.
Over time, has it gotten easier or harder to go on tour?
It's about the same, really. I mean, it's probably harder in as much as you get more, you just get older. So things you didn't notice, things I didn't care about when I was 25, I'm a bit more particular about now. But yeah, it's not like I've had some, playing this kind of music. We're never going to end up on private jets doing it. You know what I mean? So it's that is what all that stuff. I say the other 22 hours of the day outside of the 2 hours that I play the show is my job. That's what I do for a living. And I had to learn to see it that way so that the music didn't become tainted by the ordeal, as it often is, of just getting to the gig, So everybody has to do something they don't like for a living. And in my case, that's driving around like an idiot or, losing baggage or, just staying in a horrible hotel or not getting a good meal for 2 days or so, all that stuff is what I do in order to play guitar anyway, which I do anyway, So once you see it like that, then it's fine. I don't care as long as I get to play. And in order to play every night, that's pretty much what you have to do.
I have another quote from David Grissom Fresh, which is that going on tour to him is working 24 hours a day, but only getting paid for an hour and a half.
Right. That could be, it's almost like the same thing, but expressing it the opposite way. But yeah, so I try and see that I view the getting paid bit as the 22 hours, and I play anyway. So I don't play for the money. I get paid to sit in a van or on a plane or something like that.
How do you manage to motivate yourself to put on a great show night after night, performing as often as you do? Is it a chore? Do you sometimes have to do something and motivate yourself, or do you just still love playing so much that it just comes every time?
I love playing. I can be in the worst mood or the most stressed out or, who knows what. And within 4 bars, I'm the same person. And, as soon as I walk out, I'm in the same spot. And I just feel very, very lucky to have that available to me in my life, that I would never abuse that privilege. Do you know what I mean? So it's like this. And so to me, that's really all I've got. And that relates to what we were just saying. The rest of it is just stuff that you deal with in life, and everybody deals with all kinds of things in life, So I have those couple of hours, and they're totally, or they have the potential to be totally pure, totally untainted by the rest of it. And I can't wait to get to that spot. And so I don't care if there's 5 people there or 5,000 people there or whatever. I can honestly say, it's the only thing I can really say, hand on heart, I have never phoned it in on a gig. I've never, been casual about it. When I play, I'm going to play my ass off. Like that's all you've got. It's really all you've got. And if you let that bit go, by the way, and that's why I did have to rationalize it, like we were just talking about, because I did my first couple of US tours, man. They were long in a van playing to no one, night after night, no one. And if you start to let that affect the music, then you got nothing left. Why you may as well hang it up, right? So yeah, I can honestly say I'm the same person. I just feel very lucky to have that, and I wish more people could experience it. And it's a very lucky spot to be in.
Over time, would you say you've become more or less self-critical after each performance?
More, I mean, like, because you keep, and again, if you put everything into keeping it pure and it being all about those couple hours, that being about the music, then that's got to be right. Then it's because to continue to make the other stuff worthwhile, then it's got to be right. I don't listen to myself play, I mean, at all. Like, I would never put on one of my own records, or I don't watch clips on YouTube. I'm constantly barraged on Facebook with people sending video clips of me to me as though I want to watch them. I wish that people didn't record the shows and put them up because it doesn't capture it, in my opinion. I don't want to see it. And it's, to me, it's like somebody shoving naked photos of yourself in your face and saying, look at you, you know, it's not nice. And it's a moment in time, and I'm not, you know, not everything is meant to be captured. So when I listen back, I'm, you know, I can't help but hear what I want to change, but you can't change it. You have to let it go. So in order for me to let it go, and I'm talking from the perspective of improvisational music, you know, it's, in order to do it, you have to be in the moment. And then you're not really supposed to revisit that moment all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, you'd stop doing it. You'd stop taking chances. You'd stop pushing and stop looking over the cliff. You know, if you thought there's a chance you're going to fall. So I don't want to see myself nearly fall on a video on YouTube or any of that, because it's just too much. You can't be too critical. And, you know, it's that thing. It's called the Dunning-Kruger effect. Actually, I was reading about it, and it's the better you get at something, the more you doubt your ability about it, because, or not so much doubt, but the more you're aware of how much more there is to know and to be better about with it, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So because if you just understand the details and the nuances, and, you know, the opposite is true as well, when people who aren't good at something tend to overestimate their ability at it, you know. So good musicians are often riddled with insecurities about what they do, you know. So it all sounds terrible to me. No, occasionally, like 6 months later, I'll see a clip and I'll go, you know, when it's far enough away that I have an objective, can't remember what happened then and there, you know. So it's almost like watching it as a third party, and then I'll go, yeah, that's pretty good, you know. Or I'll hear my record somewhere. I'll go to some blues club and they'll be playing me, and it's a record from 5 years ago. And I'll go, yeah, that's all right, you know. So I need to distance, though, you know.
I've had a couple of guests on the show share a similar sentiment in that they learned, or the way they managed to become less self critical over time was when they came to the realization that oftentimes when they felt on stage that they had had a bad night, that they would get feedback from the audience, from the crowd, from a friend, that it was a really special night, and vice versa. Nights that they thought they were
Always the
smoking,
way.
someone would come up to them and go, "Oh gosh, you'll get him next time."
Always the way. Always the way. My sound guy and guy who makes my guitars, a good friend that I've known for 25 years, Simon Law, in the UK, he's probably heard me play just about more than anyone. And when I've been hating, he always goes, that was a really good one. There's something, but it depends what kind of musician you are. If you resign yourself to the fact that you feel like you're sucking that night, or if it makes you try harder. So it always, if it's tough, then I'll fight more, you know, to get to wherever I don't feel I'm getting, you know. And so I think that's what comes across. It's like the element of the fight in there actually makes you play harder. I did a tour, 1 week tour, me and Johnny Henderson, my longtime B3 player, with a drummer for a week, and he was recommended, and nice guy, but it wasn't the right drummer for me. You know, we were in a pinch and we took a recommendation, and it was an incredibly hard week. I've never worked so hard as with this drummer. His just feel wasn't right for my music, you know. I just hated I felt like I could do nothing at all week, and Johnny was working so hard to try and make it groove like our band normally grooves, and, you know, everything was wrong. And people loved every single gig. And I was exhausted because I felt like I was climbing a mountain just to get halfway to where I normally get, but just walking out, and people loved it. Nobody noticed that I wanted to, you know, kill myself on stage. Nobody noticed. So it is an amazing phenomenon, but there's something about that fight that people respond to.
What do you look for in a drummer? What do you look for in a bass player, an organ player, a keyboard player?
Yeah, that's a big question, and part of it is like not even really explainable. You just, especially with drummers for me, because I'm all about time and rhythm, and I have, I would suppose, sometimes I feel almost cursed with the sense of time that is acute to the degree that it is, like, so I'm really finicky about it, and that's the thing of ignorance is bliss, if you're not super tied up in the time, then you're not going to be wound up by somebody else not being as on it as you are. But so some of it's just feel and like a click when you play with someone, I don't even know what that is. This is where you get into I get rather philosophical about the concept of time in music, because there's two drummers can play exactly the same tempo and it can be totally different, worlds apart, So first of all, I'm looking for somebody that makes it feel good. I don't care if you've got a million chops or none at all. That's not. I want them to feel good. I want them to always have an element of swing, even if we're not playing anything that's swing music. There's something to do with the time like that. And this is the same for the bass player, but that's the next thing. You've got to get the drummer and the bass player to click as well, And so if I had a simple answer to that question, then it'd probably be a lot easier to find people. And then my music in particular, this is something I've discovered, is I got very lucky out of the gate when I started doing my own band with Johnny on organ and Evan Jenkins on drums. And we just played last week in London, actually, together. We've been playing together for years. But I got very lucky in that intuitively they're exactly what I grew up with Johnny. He came from the same town as me, so we've grown up on the same music, playing it together all the time. But Evan as well, the drummer, intuitively they had exactly what I like. And I almost didn't realize that not everybody else did, So you sort of spoil at the start. Then you go around and you start struggling to find that same thing in other people. So particularly in my music, it's an element of you got to know the blues. Like, you got to know the real blues and the history of the music and all the feels and all the language of the blues. Even though most of the time we're not really playing straight up blues. I do maybe 2 shuffles in the gig or something, but it's like the most important thing for the drummer is to be able to shuffle and swing, even though we only do 2 of them. If you can't do that, you can't do the rest of my gig, if you know what I mean. It's sort of, but most of the guys that are more steeped, most musicians that you find that are more steeped in the tradition of blues and more, I suppose, old school music, can't play in 7/8 comfortably or something, which I also do, or they can't, or they find that more difficult, or they don't have the sort of technical side that's required to play some of the tunes. So that's the hardest thing, and is finding somebody who can cover all the bases. And the guys I'm working with down here now, I have a US band now, 4-piece band, guitar, bass, and keys, and they're young guys, and they came out of and jazz, and fusion, but they had a sort of cursory experience of the blues, but we're sort of working backwards now to deepen those roots. But that's been really exciting for me as well, because they're taking it all on board and seeing them grow as young, guys in their early 20s, only by going backwards in music. It's like putting down deeper roots and hearing how much that makes their playing stand up. That's been really exciting for me. And conversely, like I say, I go out and I sit in with them and get to experience stuff that I wouldn't normally check out, So it broadens my experience as well. I wouldn't normally have been listening to young, funky, hip-hoppy, jazzy stuff, So it's all good, but that's the beauty of music. But it's but the short answer to the question is, this is really hard to find the right people. So.
I admire your sound. I know most of it is you, right? It's your phrasing, it's your touch. But I imagine, like most guitar players, that there's also equipment that works for you, and that you have favorite guitars and favorite instruments and just the right amps and perhaps the right cables, the right picks, the right tubes, the right everything. How precious are you about the gear that you use live and in the studio?
Strangely enough, not that precious beyond the guitar being set up right. Like, if the guitar is set up right, and that means frets and strings and action, how I like it. If I've got that, then I can pretty much make it sound 90% the same, whatever I plug into, because it is, first of all, it's conceptual. It's, like, so I pull the right sound out of whatever it is. So I have my preferences, of course, and I've settled on things because I like them slightly better, or they reproduce what I am doing better than other things, But I never see it as the gear giving me sound, So I'm quite open to, giving stuff a go. So I've played through probably half a dozen different rigs in the past month on gigs because I've flown in or just tried something out, a friend's amp or something, And so as long as the guitar's set up right, that I'm very precious about, like. And Simon, who makes my guitars, SVL, will tell you he's had the neck off a guitar between soundcheck and the show to adjust the truss rod and that kind of thing. If it works, if it works properly, then I can work with it pretty much.
Do you enjoy the recording process much?
I love the recording. I love that. This is the strange thing, talking about that being critical and things like that. But I love being in the studio and I love building records, and I love all that. I'm okay with listening back at the time, but once the record's done, I'll never listen. I won't listen to it again. Once it's mixed and that's it, done. But up until that point, I love it. Yeah. So I'd love to have my own studio one day. I'd love to be able to get up in the morning and go down to the studio and cut tracks, and that would be amazing. And I've produced a few records for other people, and I really love doing that because I don't have to be critical about myself if I'm sat there in the other. So that removes that whole aspect of just being able to enjoy making a record. So that's actually something I'd love to do more of, but touring around with my own band has kind of taken over, But I love it.
Do you experiment or tinker much in the studio, or do you find something that is good enough and it's the right mic, it's the right cabinet, right amp, let's just cut the track?
I've tried it both ways. I really have. I've obsessed over stuff and re-recorded it and just gone in. I did a record in New Orleans 4 years ago with a producer called John Porter, who produced many great blues records, and I didn't do anything. I just let him do whatever he did, and I just played guitar basically, and set my amp up, and that was it. And I would say I'm about equally as unsatisfied however I do. It's not like either way has ever yielded the ultimate results. There's always something that I want to change. So I'm probably like to a point now. The last record I made, we did a lot of forethought about what we were going to use rather than wait until we got in there. So a lot of sort of experimentation and actually Simon, who I keep mentioning, he engineered and co-produced the record with me, and he does my live sound. So there was an element of already just knowing what works anyway. So we knew which amps were what we were after and which microphones, and so we kind of went in and did it. I'm not really a tinkerer, that's for being that I'm kind of known in some way for my tone, whatever that is, but that seems to be the thing that people mention all the time. I never change tubes in an amp to see which one sounds better, or I've never changed. Once pickups are in a guitar and I like the guitar, those are the pickups that stay in that guitar. I don't like, I wonder if it could be better. And it's the same in the studio. Like if we put the microphone on and find a spot and it sounds right, then let's get on with it.
Do you think at the end of the day, the times when you have experimented, or any artist, recording artist has experimented, and they're just testing and experimenting and trying different things and trying to find what sounds just right to them, at the end of the day, I get the sense that perhaps it sounds just right to them and therefore enables them to perform a certain way. And what is recorded and what people in the audience actually responds to is that performance, and not necessarily the actual sound or tone that they were able to attain. Does that make sense?
You're absolutely right. It's an infinite feedback loop between. This is what drives me crazy about the tone chasing of the modern world and on the internet with guitar players and stuff. All it gives you is the the ability to do what you do. But unless you can do what you do, you can't get that from it. It's sort of they're intimately linked. And so yeah, I've often said this. Like, one of my favorite guitar tones is Stevie Ray on the El Macambo
Right.
concert DVD. And it's phenomenal, but it's just a Strat into blackface Fenders with JBLs, and it's not even that pretty. It's a bit honky sounding, a bit nasal here and there. But it's impossible to separate the phenomenal guitar playing going through those amps from the tone of the amp. It's absolute. They are inextricably linked, and one is not there without the other. So I totally understand what you're saying, and I've often tried to explain it myself, when people come up and say, that amp sounds great. And you're like, does it? It does. How does the amp sound?
Right.
And that's outside of even just how you touch the strings and how you, produce the notes. But it's more than that. Like you say, it's more inspiration to the artist. It's like layer upon layer of things coming together. So.
I forget who the artist was, but I read once about someone coming up to a guitar player and doing just that and complimenting either the guitar, the amp, or the whole rig and saying, that sounds fantastic. And the gentleman putting it down and then saying, how does it sound now?
Yeah, I think that was Chet Atkins. I seem to remember. They said, "Wow, that guitar sounds beautiful." And yeah, how's it sound now? But that's exactly right. And there's so many linked aspects that to try and whittle it down to, if I buy this new pedal or changing my speakers or something. But that's not to say you need that stuff as well. And so I really only care if I like the sound of my guitar. That's really what it's a bit of a selfish endeavor in that regard. And it turns out, however I get it to where I don't play plugged in at home. I play electric guitar unplugged. When I'm practicing, I've never cranked up my rig because I don't enjoy playing through a little amp or a big amp on quiet. It doesn't inspire me.
Right.
So I'd rather just play the guitar that I like. But if you heard me playing unplugged, it doesn't sound that different than when I'm plugged in, because I've worked to get sound out of the instrument as well. So it's also linked. But then I need something to inspire me, and nothing inspires me more than standing in front of a raging amp and feeling that. It's like driving a powerful car, It's I don't want to have to fight things, or I want them to, I want it to be have the power when I need it and that kind of stuff, and that inspires me.
Your example of Stevie Ray Vaughan at El Mocambo hits home in that I remember watching it on VHS, not even DVD, and on VHS on a crappy TV, and the mental picture or memory I have of it is of this glorious, incredible sound, when in reality, if I were to properly and objectively analyze it, I listened to it on crappy speakers off a VHS tape, yet it's still translated and it's still
Comes through.
Yeah.
Stevie's one of the guys that had that thing as much as anybody. The one that always stands out for me with him is, like, if you're in a shopping mall and, there's just background music on, and Let's Dance, the David Bowie track that he's on, he comes through like a laser beam, even in like a department store. It's like, even though you can barely hear the track, all of a sudden when he goes to that solo, it just comes through. But that's the intention and the confidence and the directness of his playing that you're hearing, and consequently that creates a tone. But it's much more than that the amp he was plugged into. It's a focus. And I got to say, as I get more down the rabbit hole with rhythm and time and things like that, that's your phrasing is also part of your tone. The length of a note you play and how you get from one note to another when you really go under a microscope, all of that affects the tone. It's because it creates. I'm into trying to play what I call big notes. So even if I'm playing fast, I want every note to sound and be like stand tall and exist. No throwaways, and that's what people hear as well. That's sort of the tone, is that every note is played strong and given life to it, and that's what Stevie had as much as anybody ever. It just comes through like a laser beam, and it carries, and that's much more than any rig could get you.
For sure. You've had the opportunity to share stages with some very well known artists, and I'm sure many of your heroes. But are there folks out there with whom you would love to play with that you haven't had a chance to play with yet?
Yeah, I mean, well, my answer to that question up until recently was always BB King being my very first guitar hero, and unfortunately, I never got that chance and won't now. So I'd love to play with Eric Clapton. I'd love
Mm-hmm.
to jam with Eric because he was an important early influence, but he's just Eric Clapton, isn't he? He's just Eric Clapton, and he's like the British blues guy for guitar, really. So I'd love to do that. I love Jeff Beck. I came to Jeff Beck late in life, and I didn't get him for quite a long time. It was too much for me to compute or whatever. But then one day it clicked, and I'm like, man, I'd love to stand next to him and just to experience, because sometimes standing next to these guys is a whole different ball game than even seeing them live. When you're up there and you're aware of just how big those notes are that some of them
Mm-hmm.
are playing. That's the eye opener. So yeah, they spring to mind. So two British guitarists after all my talk about American blues guys, but most of the people I really love are dead. You see.
What about perhaps singers, drummers, bass players?
Oh man, long list of those. Would love to play with Steve Jordan, the drummer.
Oh yeah, what a
Just to,
groove!
that's it. That's the pocket. That's the time. Always wanted to play a tune with Robben Ford's old Blue Line band, Tom Breckline and Roscoe Beck. I mean, I've hung with Roscoe. Have I jammed? No, I haven't jammed with Roscoe, but like played together with them because that was a big game changer for me as a kid. Seeing Robben play with those guys, I'd not seen a rhythm section like that before. Who could really play the blues, but also had much more. I suppose they're the ultimate versions of what I was talking about earlier in what I look for. So.
Mm-hmm.
I'd love to, and the same thing with Double Trouble, really. Like Stevie's band, just to, play a slow blues like that Texas Flood on the Amacambo. That would be super cool to have that level of support underneath you, to ride on because they're just like a huge, great cloud of blues that Stevie floats on. So yeah, I mean, there's all kinds of guys, man, especially modern drummers and bass players. That I love Keith Carlock, and like I said ages ago, they all feel different. So and there's something that makes me play slightly different depending on what kind of bed I've got there with that. So it's just getting to experience those things is really cool.
Your thoughts on drummers reminded me of something I heard. I want to say it was Eddie Vedder say when he was talking about Pearl Jam and all the drummers they've had, and he compared replacing a drummer to the band getting a heart transplant in terms of the magnitude of the impact that replacing a drummer can have on the band and its sound.
Oh, it's but just like even if I count a tune off, I can count off exactly the same with these different drummers, and they're all going to come in a totally different. Everybody just feels it differently. It's not right or wrong. It's just so you find yourself having to be aware of that, and just then, especially when I was just playing like with my organ trio with Johnny. So Johnny's done all the gigs, but we've probably had like 12 different guys drum at some point in the last 10 years in the band. A few guys mainly, but occasionally we had to be somebody else. So for him, it's probably even harder because he's playing bass on the organ, and
Mm-hmm.
things like and on top of the beat or behind the beat he plays against a given drummer. He has to adjust everything. So yeah, it's insane. It's a whole different thing every time.
I took a look at your calendar. I know you have a number of shows coming up. You're performing live quite a bit. Are you working by any chance on any other projects? Should we look out for a record anytime soon?
Yeah, we're trying to figure out what we're going to do with that right now. Actually, originally we were supposed to be going in the studio next month to start putting down some tracks with on a collaborative thing with a hero of mine, actually. But unfortunately, that isn't coming together at the moment. So probably before that happens, there'll be my own record. So I've got to get busy with that because it's going to be a couple of years in March next year since the last studio records. So as soon as we get it together, that'll be a new record.
Do you have any final words of advice for anyone aspiring to make a career in music and starting out in 2015?
Yeah, the only advice I can really honestly give is to just stay true to what you do and keep that integrity in your music, because you're going to encounter lots of people who want to tell you what they think is best for your music. And I still get it now. People say, well, if you just did this, you'd be more of a success, or if you just change this, or if you just made this kind of record. But if you really know what you do and you believe in what you do, you've got to keep that integrity there, because the music industry is a very transient thing, and if you lose that integrity, then you don't have anything left. So it's a hard road to take, especially today with everything the way it is. But you just have to kind of stick with it. It's not more specific advice than that, but you just kind of have to do what you do and work it out.
Matt, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. I've really enjoyed having you on the podcast.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure to be on it. I've enjoyed the chat.
Thank you for listening. Until next time.